Hello students, Mr. Young here. Welcome to Chapter 11, Lesson 3, Part 2. So today we're picking up right where we left off yesterday. We're going to talk more about that growing sense of sectionalism and how it reached a boiling point when Missouri applied for statehood in 1819. And then we get into the fun-filled world of foreign policy. So, in 1819, the Missouri Territory requested statehood. Now, this was a big problem because you see, at this point in time, there were 11 slave states and 11 free states. Most of the folks that settled in Missouri were from the South and they supported slavery. However, if Missouri joined as a free state or a slave state, it would upset the balance of power in the Senate. There are more people living in the North, so they had control. The North generally had control of the House of Representatives, which is proportional to population, but with 11 slave states and 11 free states, that meant that each sort of section, if you will, had 22 senators. So if the North picked up as a free state Missouri, then they'd have the House and the Senate, and if the South picked it up, then the South would have control of the Senate, and basically the northern states and the southern states fought bitterly over accepting Missouri as a free state or a slave state. And they ended up kind of getting saved because Maine, shortly after, requested and applied for statehood. So Henry Clay, we've heard of him before earlier in the lesson, came up with what is called the Missouri Compromise. Basically, he said, all right, problem solved. We're going to let in Missouri as a slave state. Maine will obviously come in as a free state, and you know what, let's deal with this problem, future problems right now. We're going to draw an imaginary line. You can see it here in this picture. And from this point on, states that enter from the Louisiana Territory, which isn't really shown on this map, but states that apply, or territories that apply for statehood under the line will become slave states, and above the line they will become free states. And that was essentially the Missouri Compromise. It solved the problem for now, but if anybody knows anything about what's going to happen in, say, the 1860s, you'll know it didn't really permanently solve the slave problem. That's the Missouri Compromise. Let's move into foreign affairs. Pretty interesting stuff, and with people you wouldn't expect. For example, after the War of 1812, relations with Britain became much more reasonable. In 1817, there was the Rush-Bagot Agreement. Both countries agreed to limit the amount of warships on the Great Lakes. All right, so we're de-escalating problems on the Great Lakes. They had to either decommission or destroy or just in some way get rid of warships so that they had an equal amount, a limited equal amount. The Convention of 1818 is a different agreement that established a border between the Louisiana Territory and Canada, and both sides agreed not to arm that border. It would be like a peaceful and undefended, unguarded border, much like the border between the U.S. and Canada is now. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams also negotiated the right for U.S. citizens to settle in what is now Oregon. It's actually, you can see it here, they were agreement that multiple countries could settle the Oregon Territory. It was sort of a, we'll deal with this problem now. For now, everyone's allowed to move in. Alright, now we get into Spain, which is a different boat entirely. Relations with Spain are a whole nother matter. Spain owned Florida, but there were chunks of northern Florida that the U.S. claimed was theirs as a result of the Louisiana Purchase. Spain disagreed, so now we're fighting over territories down there floating around Florida. There was this other problem, that there was the Seminole Indians that lived in Spanish-controlled Florida, and they would make raids up into Georgia. To deal with this Seminole problem, the U.S. military was dispatched. There were a few generals involved, but for the most part, we're gonna focus on the hero of the Battle of New Orleans, future President Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson did not have permission to follow the Seminoles into Florida, but that's what he did anyways, and nobody stopped him. So he goes into Florida, chasing down Seminole Indians, and while he's down there, happens to take out some Spanish forts, basically slowly conquering Florida from Spain. Secretary of State, who was John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, second President of the United States, didn't stop him. And that was because he figured Spain didn't want to pick a fight with the United States, so they would just kind of take it. And he figured maybe they would just give it up anyways to avoid problems. And indeed they did. It was called the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819. Spain ceded, or gave up, what was left of Florida to the United States, and also gave up their claims in Oregon to settle Oregon. Under the condition, all of this under the condition that the U.S. recognized Texas as belonging to Spain. Spain didn't really have a good decade. They weren't very well off in the early 1800s. You see, in 1810, a priest in Mexico by the name of Miguel Hidalgo led a rebellion for an independent Mexico. He championed things like racial equality and land redistribution. You see, there was a wage gap sort of problem there, where they treated the natives basically as slaves in a very structured hierarchy. He wasn't all about that, so he started the Mexican independence movement. He didn't end it. He was executed by Spain, but his damage was done. Mexico won its independence by 1821. Down in South America, which most of it was owned by Spain, things were not good either. You had Simón Bolívar, who was considered the George Washington of South America, led rebellions down there in multiple countries. Spain basically lost all of its, well, not quite all, but almost all of its holdings in South America by 1824. So yeah, 1800s, early 1800s, not good for Spain. That leads us into the Monroe Doctrine. So, you have all these, Spain mostly just losing its holdings in America, North America, South America, and the established world powers, they don't like this. In 1822, four major European powers, France, Austria, Russia, and Prussia. Remember, France lost Haiti, which was Santo Domingo. They get together and discuss plans to start helping Spain get her American colonies back. Why, you ask? Well, it's not good when colonies start rebelling all willy-nilly. It's bad for the established powers, like France, Austria, Russia, and Prussia. So they started kind of colluding to figure out how they could fix this independence problem that kind of started with America. The possibility of increased European involvement in the United States, the United States' backyard, worried President Monroe. The Europeans are talking about retaking South America. We don't want them in here. So President Monroe issued a statement on December 2nd, 1823. It was called the Monroe Doctrine, basically saying the U.S. wouldn't get involved in any wars or internal affairs of European nations, and it would not mess with any European colonies or landholdings that still existed within North or South America. But he also made this statement, that North America and South America are henceforth not to be considered subjects for future colonization by any European powers. He essentially drew a line in the sand and said, we won't get in your business, and you better not get in our business. There's going to be problems. And that includes South America. Stay out of there. He basically just didn't want any European powers conquering anything anywhere nearby the United States. It was really kind of a threat, a very bold statement, and it was a policy that would be followed by United States leaders for decades to come. So that's where we're at. That actually is the end of the chapter. It's the end of chapter 11. We're coming up on the Jackson era. Exciting times. Well, Andrew Jackson was a character. I have a pretty good virtual lesson on him. But regardless, we have to do tomorrow a review day, and then a test day, and that actually leads us into the winter break. For your assignment for today, 2 constructed response questions. Please answer using complete sentences. Check that grammar and spelling. Question 1, why did Missouri applying for statehood cause such a problem? We talked about that. And what was the Monroe Doctrine? We talked about that too, so you should have no problems. But if you do, feel free to contact me. That's it for today. Have a good one.